Alright guys, so we're going to talk through a couple of key points here on the incline barbell bench press. So obviously, you know, people are generally aware as coaches that, right, when we want to train the upper pec, the clavicular part of the pec, what we're going to do is some sort of incline variation. However, you do still actually have to pay attention to how you're setting up the exercise, who the individual is in front of you, and what angle you're actually working with. Because if you have someone who, you know, has a big massive arch in their back, so if you create a big arch for me there, Paddy, if he's in that arch position, and especially if he does what a lot of people do and shift the bum forward loads, then he's now in a position where this is basically more or less a flat press, you know? So this kind of lower pec region is still going to be kind of on top. It's still going to be doing a lot of the work here. And I suppose that's one of the key things to recognize when you're talking about flat versus incline versus decline, is that we're not just talking about, you know, just because you change the bench angle, that changes the muscles that are working. We're rather talking about the interaction between the individual, the exercise setup, and their actual intent. So that's a really important thing to get here, guys, is that if we're trying to, you know, perform an incline bench press, then what we might need to do for one client might be different to what we need to do for another, how we're going to set those things up. So, you know, this is particularly important for people who are trying to, you know, they have specific hypertrophy goals. So if they're like, look, my goal is to build up my upper chest, that's my main thing, you know, I'm a bodybuilder, want to bring up that part of my physique, then we do have to start to think about these things. And that might mean for someone having, you know, they might need a 60-degree incline. For some, they might just need a 30-degree incline. Okay, so that's going to depend on how much they can arch their back and the actual shape of their chest in general. Okay, so on this one here, we've got roughly a 30-degree incline. So if I'm trying to get someone to set up in such a way that they're really trying to bias the upper chest, then I don't necessarily want them to arch so much that they get totally out of that incline. Now, that might be fine, and it doesn't necessarily make too much of a difference for most of our general population clients, but for people with specific goals who are doing specific exercises for that purpose, we might want to pay attention to that. Another kind of key part here is that when we start to think about how we're using an incline bench press, the purpose of kind of, or the, not necessarily the purpose, the function of the pectoralis major, the upper part, the clavicular head, the upper pec, the function of that muscle is not just, you know, bring the arm across the body when you're at an incline. Rather, it has more of a function whereby it brings the arm kind of up and across the body. So if you do that as you're watching this video, you take your arm and you put it towards your opposite ear, you're going to find that that upper part of the pec starts to work a lot more than it does if you just bring it across the body. Okay, you're still going to feel it kind of shortening, you know, you're going to feel it working. But the key thing here is that if you can start to also bias the path of the arm, that's really when you're going to start to get a little bit more out of that pec muscle, especially that upper part. So what I would say here is that if you're trying to use an incline bench and you're trying to really bias the upper pec, another thing that you can start to do is play around with the path that you're actually using in terms of your movement path. So if I take Paddy's arm, you put your arm up for me, then rather than just being, you know, way out here and kind of going up and across like that's fine, that's one way of doing it, but you can also play around with your arm path by moving it this way. So if Paddy tucks the elbow a little bit, so we've got kind of an angle here, he can actually bring the arm up and across, and he's also got that intent of squeezing that upper part of the pec. So as I kind of palpate that, I'm going to feel that this upper part is going to be working a little bit more because of the angle that we're actually working at. Now, do I advise that people, you know, immediately go and do that with an incline barbell bench press? Not necessarily. For the most part, you know, I'm kind of happy for people to, you know, let the incline do the bit of work and kind of choose the arm position that they're most comfortable with. However, you can take lessons from what we just showed there and apply it to things like dumbbell exercises. So if you were doing this variation but you were doing it with dumbbells, you have more freedom to move around with your kind of arm path, and that might be something that's actually worth considering for you then. So although that applies, you know, theoretically it does apply in terms of like moving around the path of the arm. In general, when I'm getting someone to do this, I'm more so focused on taking the kind of the elbow position that they're most comfortable with, and then using intent to kind of change the emphasis a little bit. So if Paddy takes off the bar for me there, what I want him to do here, if he's really trying to emphasize the pec, is not just kind of move mindlessly up and down. I want him to think about sliding his hands in towards each other throughout the repetition. So even when Paddy's up in this position, I want him thinking hands in, hands in. So what that does then is that if he's trying to slide his hand in, the force of friction is pointing out this way, so it's adding additional resistance against that movement across the body. So when he does that and he's really kind of squeezing the hands in there, his chest is lighting up even when he's in that top position. So when we've got that going on and we've also got the incline, then that then means that this upper pec is going to be doing a little bit more work, so we're biasing it a bit more, okay? As a rule of thumb, if you're trying to kind of take a look and see what's doing, you know, the most work, if you can kind of take a look from the side and you see that the upper pec is more so on top, like so it's higher up than the lower pec, that's generally a sign that that's going to do a bit more of the work because of its angle of pull across the body. So if you're in more of an arched position, if you really arch me there, Paddy, you see that this kind of lower pec or mid pec starts to come on top. So as that comes on top, then that's the one with the line of pull straight across the body. Okay, so with a little bit more of a line of pull. But as we go back to the incline, especially as he flattens out, now this is the one with the line of pull across the body. So as he applies this intent then to push the hands in, what's between that? You know, what is giving us this line between those hands to push them together? It's these fibers that run this way. So it's the more so the upper part of the pec. Because if you think about the role of this lower pec here, you know, what would it be pulling for? You know, it's not gonna, it has its line of pull in this direction. So unless he's going to start to try to throw the bar forward at you in the camera, those fibers don't need to be quite as active. So again, while they will be working, and it is the case that all the pec fibers are going to be active to some degree in all pushing exercises that you do, this is how you really start to bias that upper pec. So in summary, guys, when you're thinking about this exercise, start to think about the incline, how much your client is arching their back. Remember that kind of simple rule of thumb. You know, what do you see on top when you look from the side? Where is your client's position in terms of their bum? Are they shifting it way forward? Are they keeping it back? And then that intent can be so helpful here, especially if you have someone who's reporting, you know, that, oh, all I'm feeling is my shoulders. You know, my shoulders are really bothering me. And like from experience, I would say that, you know, the incline press does tend to, you know, if someone does have shoulder pain, it can generally be a little bit more provocative because you are working through a really large range of motion. So that's another thing that I might consider here if I'm working with a client. And it doesn't always have to be proactive. You know, you could just get someone to do their bench press, see how they get on, and if they're doing well, they're doing well, no problem. But if someone's saying to me, you know, hey Gary, you know, I really want to bring up my upper chest. That's my main goal. I want to increase, you know, the size of that part of the pec particularly. And what I also want to do is, you know, get rid of this shoulder pain. The shoulder pain is really bothering me. I can't press when I'm doing it. Then there's some things that I might want to think about beyond just those basic variables. And one of those is seeing what the person actually has in terms of range of motion. So what I might do here is, if you take your arms off first, what I might do is, you know, just take a look at how Paddy's moving without any load. So if you bring that arm back for me, Paddy, I want to see kind of like how far can you pull back? Is that as far as you can go? You know, he can pull a bit further, but even at that, if I look across the body, I see that that's maybe like 2 inches above his chest in terms of what he can get actively. So if I can push him down a bit further probably, but if that's the position that he is reported to be provocative, then I might necessarily want to, you know, have to push into that position passively. I might want him to have active control throughout, so it's a position that he can really own. So then, if I see that that's the range of motion, that's his kind of active range of motion that he can get to actively, I might want to start there and see how that feels. And then, you know, as we kind of move on over time, you can still start to increase that range of motion, because it's not necessarily the case that you need to stay there. But if someone is reporting pain and it is uncomfortable, it's generally kind of a sound approach in terms of just modifying the range of motion a little bit. And of course, if there are differences between sides and maybe it's just one shoulder that's feeling quite stiff, then generally I would stick with the range of motion of the more limited side, just as a kind of a sound rule of thumb. So as he begins to do the exercise then, you know, as his coach, what I might want him to do is, you know, first tell them to really focus on that intent throughout. So hands in. So we're trying to focus more on the chest and less on just kind of the movement itself, because sometimes that might be, you know, just giving the person the sensation that, you know, it's all in the shoulders, and they're not enjoying that experience. So if I can get them to feel this chest working more and keep it on the chest throughout, that might improve their experience. So down nice and slowly for me, Paddy. He's going to come to that point, and I'm kind of watching here. I'm like, all right, to there and back up. Good man. And then I'm going to kind of keep those fingers there. Just give him some feedback. All right, there you are, and then back up. Boom. And there you are. Pause on the fingers this time. Keep those hands sliding in, and then back up again. Boom. And re-rack. That's fine. All right, guys, so, you know, just keep those things in mind. As I said, it doesn't mean you have to, you know, go into that much detail with every single client, because for many of our clients, they just come in, they want to build a bit of muscle, a bit of strength, they hop on the incline press, all feels good. That's absolutely fine, you know, but for some individuals, you might need to do that little bit of customization, some additional cues, you know, especially if someone is saying, you know, I've been doing bench presses for years, never feel my chest working, and always find that my shoulders are getting aggravated. That's where you start to look at those variables, and that's how you become a coach who's actually applying personal training, personalizing for the individual, rather than just, you know, handing out recipes. So there you go, guys.